Welcome to Animal Rights, the Abolitionist Approach Commentary. I'm Gary Francione. This is our 13th No Frills, No Bells, No Whistles podcast concerning the abolition of animal exploitation, the failure of animal welfare regulation, veganism as the baseline of the animal rights movement, and the importance of the principle of ahimsa or nonviolence in all of our advocacy efforts. Well, this is the first podcast of the new decade. And I'm quite confident that this decade will see a great growth in veganism and in the abolitionist movement, which is growing by leaps and bounds. In any event, we have a really, what I hope will be a good program this week. I mentioned on the website abolitionistapproach.com that there was going to be a two-part BBC program that was going to be on the BBC World Service, which is the most widely listened to radio broadcast in the world, and that it was a two-part series that was being done by a man named Victor Schonfeld. And Victor Schonfeld in 1982 did a film called The Animals Film that was narrated by Julie Christie. It was a very influential film. It was the first time, it certainly was the first thing I ever saw that really showed how badly animals are treated by humans, and it had a real big impact in terms of providing some very powerful visuals. Well, anyway, Victor has now come back 27 years later, and he wants to see whether or not things have changed since he made the film in 1982. And the BBC is doing this two-part series as part of its One Planet program called Animals and Us. And the first segment was broadcast on New Year's Eve, December 31st. The second one will be broadcast on January 7th. So what I thought we would do in this podcast is I have with me Dr. Roger Yates, who is a sociologist and a very good sociologist, and one of the few people who I think really understands the movement, who understands the history of the animal movement and where we are today and how we got there, and Elizabeth Collins from the New Zealand podcast phenomenon, Elizabeth Collins. And actually, I have to tell you, initially I proposed this to Roger. Roger, are you there?
I am. Good evening.
Yes, there's Roger. And Elizabeth, you're there, right?
Yes, hello.
Yes, good. Okay, fine. It's working. The Skype connection is working. Initially I proposed this to Roger, and he said, yes, this is a good idea. He said, but don't you think we should have somebody participate in the discussion who actually might be a little younger and have a different perspective from us? I thought that was a somewhat ageist comment on Roger's part, but he was in fact correct, that it would be interesting to get the perspective of somebody. Roger and I were around when the Animals film came out in 1982. As a matter of fact, we were adults when the film came out in 1982, and we both saw it when it came out in 1982. And Elizabeth, have you ever seen the Animals film?
I have not.
It's interesting. I think it was unique in terms of what it was at the time. There really wasn't anything out there like it. And in the later 80s and throughout the 90s, and certainly in the past few years, there's been such a proliferation of videos that the Animals film is. I still think it's an excellent piece of documentary filmmaking, but it's been I don't want to say supplanted, because it hasn't. I mean, I think that there's just been such a proliferation of video material out there that there are a lot of things that people don't see, and it's not surprising to me that this is one that you haven't seen, and probably most of the people, I would imagine, in your generation. In any event, well, let me just say before we go further, there's going to be a second segment on January 7th, and I don't know. That's going to be dealing with vivisection, but I don't know what else Schonfeld will be talking about in that segment. And so I don't want to prejudge that, and also, I have a lot of respect for Victor. I think Roger does as well, and Elizabeth, if she knew him, she would have respect for him as well. But in any event, so I want to preface that by saying I think overall it was a really great idea for Victor to do this, and so let's discuss what you thought of the program. Go ahead, anybody, say something.
Well, I think the first general comment I would make here, Gary, is that the program, the World Service program, is a reflection of the animals film itself. The animals film is broken into two parts, looking at factory farming on the one hand and vivisection on another. It does start actually with a look at pets, but in general terms, it's factory farming, half of it, and then vivisection. And obviously, this program seems to be mirroring that in a sense. We've had factory farming for this first week and vivisection for the next week, which we're yet to hear. So there's an echo there of the format, I suppose. I think from an abolitionist point of view, we must question about whether the emphasis is entirely about factory farming or whether we're going to be looking at farming in general. That would be an issue for us as abolitionists, obviously. But there is, as I said, this echo with the film itself, and also with the style as well. The intercutting of the vox pops and the TV clips into the interviews in general. That was very much like the general film. So I think that there was a reflection there in terms of the content of the early film, and then this update, and also style. At the same time, I think that when the animals film first came out, I don't think the word vegan was used, whereas the word vegan was used quite a lot in this program. So in that sense, there's a bit of a movement to a recognition that veganism is becoming important within the movement. So there was a kind of following on and revisiting going on there in terms of the program.
Elizabeth, now, having not seen the animals film, but listening as one of the millions of people who did not see the animal film, who have now listened to this program, what was your impression, overall impression?
My overall impression was that it covered suffering and factory farming and didn't cover animal use. And I think the best part of it was when there was the issue of the welfare groups and their campaigns were discussed and were subtly exposed. I think that we discussed that a little bit. I discussed that with my friends here, whether or not your average person would pick up on the criticism. I think it is a welfarist production, and I think that some people may be intrigued by the things that you said, Gary, and try to find out more about you. Oh, that was an interesting, concept. And people who support HSUS may have had a little bit of insight. But overall, I don't want to rain on the parade, but I really just think that it was a further continuation of this. The animals that we use for food must be treated better, and that's been going on for decades. So I don't know if it's going to do much paradigm shifting with regard to people's, like, a new idea. I wish there had been more about just animal use.
It's interesting. I had a similar reaction. I mean, in fairness to Victor, the animals film was about treatment. I mean, it was made in 1982, and it was a focus. Its exclusive focus was on treatment, and I was. So in fairness to him, the fact that he comes back 27 years later and he asks the question, have we made any improvements in how we treat animals, rather than have we moved toward developing an ethic which is critical of animal use, period, and which is moving in an abolitionist direction, it doesn't surprise me. What was interesting was when he started the program, at the outset he said, this is not going to be balanced, it's not going to be dispassionate. I am opposed to all suffering, all animal suffering, whether it's for pleasure or for need. and I thought, wow, because he here it seemed that he was really taking a position, a rather strong position on animal use, because there's no animal use that doesn't involve the kindest animal use involve what we might call the kindest animal use involves suffering and death, so there's no such thing as animal use without suffering. So I thought when he said, well, that he was challenging animal suffering, opposed to animal suffering for human pleasure or human need, that he might go further. But what he ended up doing was very much staying with the format of the animals film, and asking whether or not we've made any improvements in the treatment of farm animals. And I suspect next week, although I don't know, I suspect next week the question will be, have we made any improvements in the numbers of animals we're using, or the procedures that we're doing, or the laboratory treatment issues. So in a sense, in fairness to him, the movie was about treatment, and this program is about treatment. I do agree. I mean, I would also, though, agree with Roger that the fact is he mentioned veganism several times. I wish he had talked a little bit more about that. But again, it got mentioned, and I suspect that that's something in and of itself. But in any event,
also, if I could just jump in there too, in a sense that. In defense of Victor, I guess, he can only really report on what's going on. He can't really report on the progress of the movement to end animal use, and on the grounds that the movement that he's reporting on is one which is regulating animal treatment. So, in a sense, he can only report on that. I think he did quite a good critical job in a sense. And also in terms of treatment, I noticed that the general producer of the series, One Planet, Mike Williams, I think it was, introduced the program and said this is about the way we treat animals. And then the interesting thing there was, and this brought back a real memory from me, was it went to Channel 4, which is the British TV station, which was launched in 1982 as well. And so the animals film featured in its first week of broadcasting. And it actually used the little clip which introduced the animals film. And there it talked about, the film was about the exploitation of non-humans, didn't talk about treatment. Another interesting thing, of course, as well, is that I agree that the animals film in general is about treatment, but one of the first statements about, in the animals film, one of the first things that Julie Christie says is a critique of the property status through the children's paintings. There's a bit actually when the titles are coming up where you roll past a series of children's paintings, and there is a critique, if you like, of the property status there of non-human animals. I suppose what really we're looking for at abolitions is consistency, and that's the bit that's not there, I think, either in the original film or in this program.
Well, I vaguely remember. I mean, I haven't seen the animals film in some years. Actually, I have a copy of it in my office, and I'll be returning to school next week, and probably will watch it again. But I vaguely remember what you're talking about, but I never got the impression. I didn't get the impression when I saw that, and I've seen it several times, that it ever really was challenging use per se as much as it was focused on treatment, and I certainly think that Victor made it clear, I think, in the segment, that he's not a vegan, he's a vegetarian.
Exactly.
And which surprised me a bit, actually. And my guess is that he's probably working toward veganism, but he's not. And I was surprised because...
Yeah, I mean, he's a bit of a surprise in the 21st century, I guess. And he described himself as a vegetarian for 32 years. And in fact, it's interesting because when the Mind Lab feature was set up, which was quite interesting, I think.
Roger, describe that a bit for people who... perhaps
there's a Mind Lab. It's neurological research. It's the person in charge of this particular piece was called Dr. Duncan Smith, and it's on the south coast of England. And effectively, it's one of those situations where you're given a smell to smell and then a screen to watch. And then I think what happens there is that you get given 3 images after you've smelt a smell, and then the equipment records your response to it. And there was 3 people involved. Victor, who described himself in the middle, as it were, as the 32 years being a vegetarian. Then there's a lifelong vegan called Vicky, and then there's a meat eater called Dane, who said that in no way would he consider becoming a vegetarian or a vegan. And
not without a fight, he said. Not without a fight.
He's already said, I didn't pick up on that one. And so the interesting thing there was that when they did the tests, and Victor reports that he had to go back 2 hours later to get the test results, as it were, both himself as the vegetarian and the Vicky the vegan reacted negatively to the pictures of things like burgers, whereas Dane reacted positively. And there was some talk then about in terms of, are we kind of wired to be attracted to meat? And this a small part of evidence, it's very unrepresentative, obviously, but this small piece of data was suggesting that we're not hardwired. It's a question of maybe our upbringing. And in fact, it was from that section when they went straight into the Melanie Joy section, which was the sociological bit about culture and everything. So it was all kind of fed into the fact that we are meat eaters culturally rather than we're hardwired to be so.
Yeah, no, I thought that was an interesting segment, and I'm glad he. I mean, I when he first started describing it, I thought, oh, what's this going to be about? And is this going to be a waste of time or what? And then I was pleasantly surprised, because I thought, because we hear this all the time from people that eating animal products is something that's that we're hardwired to do, and so they're and that we're all walking around suffering, and thinking, boy, I really wish I could eat a steak, or boy, I would love a piece of that cheese pizza or something. And it was interesting.
Yeah, of course, the stereotype is that vegans go weak at the knees whenever they smell bacon.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes, that's right. And so I'm glad. I'm actually glad that he did that. But as I say, I was surprised when he identified himself as a vegetarian.
Well, I was going to say, going back to that, because I was also very surprised. My friend Vish wasn't surprised, because he said if he was vegan, we would have heard of him. If he did this huge feature film and then he was a vegan animal rights activist, we would have heard of him. I'm sorry to say that, but we hadn't really heard of him. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we did see the animals film.
But he might not have been a vegan. I mean, I guess it didn't surprise me that he wasn't a vegan in 1982. And I have to tell you, I became a vegan in 1983. I had never even heard the word vegan. I was unfamiliar with the word vegan, and I was not aware until I was told, and I learned. But I was unaware that there were people in the world who didn't eat any animal products whatsoever. So now I realize that that although things were not as developed then, even in Britain, as they are now, or perhaps they're not. I'm not sure, but it doesn't surprise me that he wasn't a vegan in 1982. What surprised me was that he hasn't become a vegan since, and that surprised me a little bit. But look, and maybe, I mean, it's also not clear to me, that maybe he is, recently a vegan or whatever, but he didn't feel that he had been vegan long enough to make a statement, so he wanted to, identify himself as a vegetarian, and then have somebody involved in the study who was, or calling it loosely a study, but in the project, who was a lifelong vegan. That woman, Vicky, was her name?
Vicky. Yeah, it was Vicky.
Yeah.
The thing is, with regard to his vegetarianism, I was sad when I heard that, because it just changes the entire dynamic. You have somebody still using animals. So when I found that out, nothing surprised me. He's only really talking about treatment. Now, if you think about the fact that he's still using animals, he is concerned with treatment.
Well, let's talk for a few minutes about what Victor did with talking about. I thought he got into that section about large animal organizations, and he actually used the segment of part of the discussion that he and I had about the large organizations, in which I was taking the position that the large animal organizations had done very, very little to improve animal treatment, because, in fact, given the property status of animals, they really couldn't do very much to improve the treatment of animals. And he did, I think, confront both Wayne Pacelle of the Humane Society of the United States and Martin Baloch. Roger, do you remember? What's the name of the group that Martin heads in Austria? I think it's Association.
It's not. Was it Animal Emancipation or something like that? Is it?
No. I think it's Association Against Animal Factories or something like that. But it's
Society Against Animal Factories or something like that. Yes,
yeah.
That's right.
And he did confront both of them, and basically say, well, where are you getting with your incremental improvements in animal welfare, using animal welfare reform to get incremental improvements in treatment? Where's it getting you? And is it working? And he seemed to think that Martin Baloch was taking a different approach from Wayne Pacelle, and I don't think that's right. I think both Wayne and Martin pursue the same sorts of welfare reforms. You have HSUS promoting something like Proposition 2, which is supposed to result in the conventional battery cage being phased out or being banned as of 2015 in California. Whether that's going to happen is my speculation is it won't. It's certainly not going to happen in 2015. But you have Martin Baloch doing the same sort of thing in Austria, and so I was a little confused, because it seemed that Victor thought that there was a difference between what Wayne was doing and what Martin was doing. I don't really see any distinction. I think they're both pursuing tiny steps, and also a point that didn't come out. And again, in fairness to Victor, because it was 27 minutes or 28 minutes long, however long the segment was, and there's only so much you can do in that time, and there's only so much complexity you can get into. But one of the interesting things that I think, or one of the things I think would have been interesting to explore with both Wayne and with Martin, was whether these incremental reforms are things that merely make animal production more efficient. They're very, I mean, they in a sense are making animal production more efficient. For example, Wayne talked about the gestation crate campaign. There's a perfect example of something that HSUS argues ought to be abolished, because it is economically inefficient, and that electronic sow feeding operations are much more economically efficient. They result in greater sow productivity, etc. If you look at the HSUS campaign on controlled atmosphere killing, it's the same thing. This is this will increase production efficiency. This is a better thing to do. Same thing for there's a literature out there about why veal crates are economically inefficient, etc., etc. And so, in a sense, it would be interesting to see how they would have dealt with, how both Wayne and Martin would have dealt with the argument that, for the most part, these animal welfare reforms are not doing anything except making production more efficient, to the extent that you have things like cage-free eggs that may be raising the price to some degree. People are willing to pay that price, not simply because, and probably many of them not primarily because they're interested in animal welfare, but because these things, free-range eggs, etc., are being promoted as healthier products. So people are, there's a lot of different reasons.
So there was a bit where they intercut. I mean, it's interesting there, because I thought there was some ambiguity in the way that the HSUS and then the Baloch situation was presented. But also, when Pacelle was talking, he did intercut with the kind of vox pop thing, some of the media thing, where it was talking about Burger King was going to get some good publicity out of this. And I think in some senses, that's the way that Victor Schonfeld critiques things by bringing in a counter voice underneath or on top of the person who's talking. Now, this goes back to Elizabeth's point. Is that too subtle in a sense for the general reader or the listener? Because my initial reaction to the Austria thing, Gary, was the same as yours, and so I listened back to it again very carefully. And so this is my kind of take on that, if you like. First of all, we started off with the HSUS, and interestingly, what Schonfeld did there, he talks about the HSUS, Peter, and the RSPCA all put together as welfareists, and he says that they heap praise on businesses that profit from meat eating, just because they've made some very, very small changes. Okay, then he's talking about the exploitation systems are left intact, and then he switches to Austria, and he says, here, there's something different going on in Austria, but his actual words were interesting. He says that in Austria, there's been some decisive nationwide victories, but I'm wondering whether it's the nationwide which is important there. That the fact that Purcell was talking about state by state and proposition after proposition, whereas the distinction there with Austria might have been the nationwide thing. But the interesting thing was that Baloch seemed to. I've been a critic of Baloch's position. I think it's a bit elitist. I think it's a bit shallow. I think it's a systems analysis. And Baloch is effectively saying that you have some kind of elite contest, and the rest of the proles they fall into line eventually. And he was talking about the change from battery to barn eggs, not even free range. He said. So we're talking about barn cages, which Schonfeld himself said, well, wait a minute, they're still confined, aren't they, and all this. And what Baloch seemed to say in answer to that was that he had some great faith in the law, because the law said that the barn chickens had to have X, Y, and Z in terms of welfare. And so because the law says it, everything must be fine and dandy. But obviously, as we know, when you try to regulate atrocities, you're into a really sticky, messy kind of phase of things to do. And then, interestingly, Baloch then said something incredibly interesting, because he says the barn system is good in terms of a welfare improvement. And then he says, but even then it's not very good, because the chickens will still spend a year in this hole until they're slaughtered. And so it ended up that the system that he was praising initially, he then described as like a hellhole for birds, which is quite weird. But at the same time, he then went back and said, incrementally, he believed, he's convinced of this, that incrementally this move to barn eggs will eventually move to an end of all egg farming. Now, I don't see how you can make that kind of leap whatsoever. And that section was finished then, just finally, with Schonfeld saying, isn't it interesting that some organizations, and here he was including Baloch's organization along with HSUS and the rest, said, isn't it interesting that organizations need to claim victories even though the animals suffer still?
Absolutely.
Farm.
No,
yeah. So I think he brought them back. I think they brought them all back again together then. I think he initially said there's something different going on in Austria, but let's have a look at it. Once we've looked at it, then we find that it's actually not.
Yeah, I actually listened to it again. I thought it was a little ambiguous. I really couldn't tell. I think that your interpretation of it is certainly plausible, and it may have been what Victor was intending. But I think it was. As you know, I've been a critic of Baloch's as well, and I've written about Baloch's approach. I think it's tremendously confused. As a matter of fact, I don't really see Baloch's approach as being anything different from the classic new welfarist approach that I was describing in 1996. This faith, this absolutely groundless faith that incremental reform is going to lead to abolition when there's no empirical proof of that. And I thought Baloch was internally inconsistent. He first started off by saying that, well, they didn't want to make small changes because small changes would establish an equilibrium that they would be stuck with, for a long time. And so, they didn't want to go for the small changes. They wanted to go for the large changes. And then he proceeds to describe moving from conventional battery cages to cage-free eggs. and then says, well, this is a big change. Well, he didn't bother to explain why that's not going to establish an equilibrium that we're not going to be stuck with for another 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, how's that going to lead to abolition?
Exactly. It's number one. Number two, he never describes or never explains in anything that I've read that he's written as to how there's going to be any sort of, how incremental reform is going to lead to abolition. So I thought, in a sense, it was an interesting. What Victor did, though, was interesting given the relatively short time period that he had. I thought he raised. And I don't know how subtle. The problem is I just don't know whether it was too subtle for people. But I certainly think he succeeded, even for those people who aren't really familiar with the issue all that much. He succeeded in really raising, I think, in a fairly clear way, that there's something wrong with these large organizations, that he clearly was uncomfortable and had that very long overplay segment of instances where industry is being praised by, where industry is really benefiting from accepting these welfare reforms, which are economically efficient for them anyway, but they're getting praised by the animal organizations, and I think. What was coming out in that segment was a certain lack of comfort about the relationship between the animal protection organizations and the institutional exploiters. So it was all in all interesting.
Listening to Baloch, it was astonishing to me how much he basically figuratively hung himself. It was amazing what he did. He started out by all the things that you said. He had utter faith in the law, that the animals that are property. I mean, the law demands that they have this and they have that, and therefore everything's hunky-dory. And then he turned around and said, but all the male chicks are still killed at birth, and all the hens are still slaughtered after a year. Anybody listening to that is going to, any animal welfarist who's a new welfarist, who's a new vegan, who's like thinking that these things are good, is going to be listening to the leader of the supposedly huge. That segment alone was enough, I think. I liked that segment. I didn't like the Way on South segment. He's such a politician. I don't like that it ended on him saying that, animal industry fears HSUS above all. But I think Baloch's segment, even if anybody else hadn't said anything, was enough to put questions in people's minds.
Roger, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that in the end, from that section that we've been talking about, the decisiveness that he began talking about in relation to Austria is only relative in the end. But I think that he kind of moves to that conclusion from a statement of difference and says, well, here's something that's a little bit different, and then let's analyze it and look at it, and then. As Elizabeth says, Baloch kind of really made a bit of a mess of it in a sense, and then the conclusion was, well, in actual fact, they're all the same. They're just making very small steps, and at the same time, they're kind of praising the companies that are involved, and also this faith in the law thing, which I suppose is something that they all share. In the sense that even if you look at something like the controlled atmosphere killing kind of thing in Canada, this idea that somebody somewhere is going to monitor this, and it's going to have some kind of legal, monitoring system, which means it's going, these kind of reforms are going to be meaningful. Whereas for a fact that 10 years down the line, somebody else is going to be making videos exposing the system, which is supposed to be great, 10 years ago.
And I liked the way he said, and the bottom line is you're leaving all of these farmed animals in horrific factory conditions. Bottom line, I mean, barn eggs, free-range eggs, it's all factory farm anyway.
Right, exactly. I mean, look, let me make two comments about this segment. First of all, it's interesting. I met Martin Baloch in the 1990s. I was in England, and I think it was right around the time either I had finished or was I think I had just finished Reign Without Thunder, and it was certainly the distinction between rights and welfare and my rejection of new welfarism and the whole notion that incremental welfare reform would lead to abolition was something that's what I was talking about then. And I lectured at a number of universities. I went to Manchester, East Anglia, and a couple of other places. And Baloch I don't remember how I met him, but he came. I mean, he drove around and drove from place to place with us, and we had quite a bit of discussion. He at the time was a graduate student, as I recall, at Cambridge, and we had a lot of discussion, and it was interesting because I thought that he was quite agreed with the logic of the of Rain Without Thunder in terms of what I was saying about the property status of animals and its inability to really result in abolition, or indeed to do anything except make production more efficient. And then all of a sudden he reemerges now as this spokesperson for New Welfare. With respect to Wayne Purcell's segment, Elizabeth, when you said you didn't like the way it ended because he made that statement about HSUS being feared by agribusiness. This is something that I think it's important to focus on for a second, because this is a very, very common comment that you hear from people who defend this welfare reform business. They talk about, well, industry is upset with us. Well, industry is always going to, industry is this is part of a choreographed dance between the animal protection people and the institutional users. They basically will always challenge anybody who wants them to make a change, even if it's a change which is efficient for them to do, or at worst is neutral. They're going to resist it because they're concerned that later on there's going to be demands for changes that are not things that they want to do. Number one. Number two, they're always busy accusing their most moderate critics of being extremists. That's part. I mean, that goes on. That goes on in every single. I'm sorry if the dog barking is being picked up by the microphone. There's nothing I can do. There are 5 of them. There are 5 of them in this house, and it's amazing. It's amazing that we can get through it without more cacophony. But
well, they obviously didn't at the end of this section either, Gary.
Yes, exactly. They were upset with Baloch. They were very upset with Baloch. That deep voice that you hear is our latest edition. That's Christine.
Oh, is it Christine?
That's Christine, who is just an absolutely lovely dog, and she is now bounding in here. And she's a lovely dog, and she's our 9-year-old golden retriever that we got from a kill shelter, who had been dumped by her family and then adopted and brought back one day later because she allegedly did not get along with the dog of the people who adopted her, and gave her all of 24 hours to show that. And she's been here for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks. It's the easiest introduction we've ever had. The other dogs, our other 4 dogs, love her. She's an absolutely wonderful dog. Now, perhaps she agrees. And it may be the case. Christine, honey.
Go, Christine. Go, Christine.
Now, one of the reasons why the other dogs may like her so much is because she's very tall, and she can get up on the counter, and she has several times gotten up on the counter, and she has pulled down food. In one case, she got an entire loaf of bread. And then this morning she got a bag of vegan biscuits that I had just gotten yesterday, and so she brings them down, gets them off the counter, splits them open, and then everybody has a good time. So this may be one of the reasons why the other 4 like her so much, but she's a wonderful dog, and it is sad when you think that people have a dog for 9 years and then take the dog to a kill shelter and say, I don't want this dog anymore. It's just remarkable to me. But getting back to the comment that Purcell made, I think it's important to understand that these reactions that one gets from industry are really quite predictable. They always call their most moderate critics the extremists, because they want to set those people up as the people that they, if they give in to them, then they've given in to the extremists. They've given in to people who are making really hardcore demands, which in fact HSUS is not doing at all. As a matter of fact, HSUS is by and large a real partner with the institutional exploiters, and a real partner in terms of facilitating the continued exploitation of non-human animals by making it more acceptable and more economically efficient. The other point I wanted to make is that Wayne made the comment that and again, I know Martin and Wayne personally, and as I do many of the people that I've talked about in terms of the welfare movement, and I'm not challenging or questioning their sincerity at all. I sincerely believe they're just wrong. And Wayne made the comment. He said, well, there had never really been any progress in the factory in the area of factory farming until HSUS got into the fray, I believe was the expression he used.
Yeah, that's
and
right, yeah.
and what that neglects, and what people need to understand, is factory farming was something that developed only in the 1950s, basically, and so it's a relatively recent phenomenon. And it is only now, in the first part of the 21st century, that agricultural economists are becoming aware of the inefficiencies of factory farming. That people didn't really know very much about the inefficiencies of factory farming before, and it's only now becoming clear that certain practices really are not efficient practices, and they are what some of these welfarists explicitly identify as low-hanging fruit. And so now you have groups like HSUS and PETA and these other groups going after the low-hanging fruit, things that are already identified by agricultural economists as economically problematic. So the fact that that they're getting rid of that Wayne and HSUS is having some success in with things like the gestation crate, well, big deal. I mean, the pork industry has problems with the gestation crate. The pork industry has recognized the gestation crate is problematic. The veal industry has recognized that the veal crate is problematic in terms of the amount of veterinary costs that are involved and how you can lower those costs substantially without making too much of a sacrifice in what you want to sell in terms of meat, by giving the animals a bit more space and some social contact with other calves. So in a sense, it's there's no surprise there, and anybody who really believes, and I think again, there's only so much Schonfeld could get into in 27 minutes, and I'm not saying that I fault him for not getting into these.
In some senses, Schonfeld left a couple of strands untied, but then, as you say, he was very limited for time. But the interesting thing about the Purcell thing there, what you're saying is that these welfarists are pushing an open door, which is true, right? But the thing is, the door won't be flung open for them. They will still have to push because the other side of it have got their own constituents who they've also got to satisfy in terms of defending their interests and this kind of stuff. So if you're, as it were, the trade union of the farmers, you can't just be seen to capitulate to the animal welfarists, the enemy, from the farmer's point of view. What you've got to do is you've got to resist them, even though in the end you're actually going the same kind of way. So it's, as Gary said, it's a bit of a dance. So the state is also involved, but there's also another element to the cell, I feel, and Elizabeth touched on that when she called him a politician. You said he was a politician, and I really believe that myself, because if you go then from this program, which presumably Wayne would have thought is going to go out to animal welfare people who are familiar with the animal film, etc., etc. He says that about, well, the meat industry are frightened of the HSUS, and yet 3 or 4 weeks ago he was interviewed by Ag Talk or an industry, and there he's saying to them, with an audience of farmers, you've got nothing to worry about from us. We just want to tinker at the edges. We just want to regulate a few things. There's nothing fundamental that we're going to do to you. So he's playing it both ways, just like a politician would.
Absolutely, and I didn't like that he got so much time. I was annoyed by that. But one of the things about that, and I don't know if this is related to the BBC, they have some nerve saying that they're abolishing factory farming or whatever with these campaigns, because if they have, if they can possibly even begin to describe what they're doing as not being factory farming, as these so-called free-range systems, or even like the veal crates, if they put 3 or 4 veal calves into a cubicle together, that's factory farming. It's all factory farming. So it really infuriates me that they're selling this lie to people about how we're abolishing factory farming. We are not. And in New Zealand, they're bringing in, because with the population rising and the meat consumption rising, it's going, intensive farming is going to increase. They're just going to have slightly different ways of doing it. They're realizing that these animals do have emotional lives and that they are sentient beings. But rather than take the vegan argument, they're saying, well, we have to, in order for our production to be better, we have to acknowledge that fact. And what are we going to do about that? But it's all factory farming. And I just think that people are deluding themselves when they think that they're tackling factory farming and abolishing factory farming.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not just Wayne Purcell and Martin Baloch who say these things. I mean, you have Peter Singer saying that the worst abuses of factory farming are being phased out in Europe, which is just nonsense. I mean, it's absolute nonsense. And I mean, I don't even understand how anybody can say that with a straight face. But that's the position that they're taking. I should say that Roger Yates and I have a paper that we have done. The ball, and I take the blame for not finishing my part of it yet. But
you're a very bad man.
yes, indeed, yes,
we're waiting with bated breath.
Well, it's a paper that basically takes the position that these welfare reforms are basically things. If the movement took an abolitionist position and demanded animal rights and the abolition of animal exploitation, this is what you'd get anyway. You'd get industry responding by making minor welfare changes and then trying to reassure the public that everything is fine and they don't have to go further. So these would be you'd get these sorts of reforms. I mean, and I also think because they're economically efficient, most of them are, you'd end up getting them anyway. I mean, the interesting thing is that if you were starting a chicken slaughtering operation tomorrow and you didn't use controlled atmosphere and you didn't use the controlled atmosphere killing method, you'd be a lunatic, because it's a much cheaper way of killing chickens. So I mean, you're going to see these things happen anyway, and they're going to happen anyway. And if there had been, and so in a sense, not only are they unnecessary, they're both unnecessary. The animal welfare reforms are unnecessary and counterproductive. They would occur anyway, and then they end up being used by animal welfare organizations to reassure the public that it's all right for them to continue to consume animals. I mean, it is truly bizarre. I want to move on to because we have a sociologist on the program. I need some enlightenment, because I heard these comments by Melanie Joy, I believe, and Joan Denayer, and I have to say I was confused by both of them, because the Melanie Joy comments. I mean, first of all, to put it in context, after Schonfeld goes to does this project where the guy subjects him to aromas of meat and then shows him pictures, etc.
Duncan Smith.
Duncan Smith, yes. After the Duncan Smith event, Victor asks. He says, "Well, it's not. We're not hardwired to eat these products. So the question becomes, why are we doing it? If we're not hardwired to do it, why are we doing it?" And then they interviewed Melanie Joy, and she says, "Well," and I took some notes. She said that there's an invisible dominant ideology that facilitates this, and it's called carnism.
Carnism.
Yeah, carnism, and that that it really sort of this ideology sort of keeps the animals out of our sight, so we don't really sort of the animals are invisible. And I had two reactions to that. My first reaction was I thought that's exactly what Carol Adams. I haven't seen this book, this carnism book. I've ordered it, and I will be interested to see, to the extent that she cites Carol Adams, because that's exactly what Carol Adams was saying 25 years ago, was that for a variety of reasons we didn't really recognize the animal that was there. And I did.
The absent stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was the absent reference stuff. Now, I disagreed with Carol when she said that 25 years ago. I mean, I think she was wrong 25 years ago to say that, because I think that to some degree it's true, but I would say that we do know what we're doing. And we do have this. It's not an ideology that actually keeps the animal out of our sight and out of our minds. It's an ideology that justifies the exploitation of animals. That is, we have this notion that that animals are natural inferiors or spiritual inferiors. They don't have reason. They don't have symbolic communication. They don't have abstract concepts. They don't have an interest in their lives. They don't have souls. Whatever it is that they're natural inferiors, cognitive inferiors, or they're spiritual inferiors, and it is that which justifies the exploitation, and so I mean, and it's called speciesism. I mean, I don't understand why we need yet another word. I mean, carnism. Why? I mean, we've got a word called speciesism that sort of really does explain it quite well once we understand it. And she made the comment, and I wrote this down: if we don't name it, we won't see it, and if we don't see it, we won't discuss it. And I think that that's just nonsense. I mean, maybe it's because I don't understand sociology well enough, but I thought that was nonsense, because it seems to me that we have named it. It's called speciesism. We do see it, and we discuss it endlessly. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of people, and we heard from people like Wayne Pacell and people like Martin Baloch, and there's a zillion people out there who have full-time jobs, and they're making good livings doing nothing but talking about this stuff. So we are discussing it. We're just coming to the wrong conclusions, in part because the animal welfare movement is pushing people in the wrong direction and making them think that the solution to the problem is happy meat. But I really didn't understand this business about the invisible dominant ideology, and it just didn't make any sense to me.
Well, she was talking about speciesism, but she was giving it a different name. And as Nybert says, that most people talk about speciesism as a prejudice, and so that kind of brings it down to individuals, whereas sociologists would see speciesism as an ideology, and it's embedded into our institutions. And so in that sense, she was kind of saying the kind of thing that Bauman would say, the kind of material that I use in my PhD, for example. Like, for example, physical distance will create moral distance, this kind of thing. And maybe what she was really saying, in a sense, was that the ideology that we call speciesism is making non-humans morally invisible, which is one thing that probably is true, that you could probably say that. And also, she was involving some of the work that I've done as a sociologist, which is look at the impact on children being brought up within the ideology of speciesism, or being born into a species society, if you like. And she said that we begin eating animals and exploiting them in other ways before we're aware that that's what we're doing. So before we're morally aware individuals, we're involved in this thing, And so from that point of view, I could, as a sociologist, kind of latch on to what she was saying. Although, I mean, I don't necessarily think that she needs to kind of change the language, but again, that's what academics do. They want to be known for a particular word, indexicality, kind of, this name means that concept, and so that's probably where carnism.
Let me ask you a question. Have you seen the book?
No, funny enough, I did what you did, and I looked at buying it today, funny enough.
Well, yeah. Because I'm very curious as to, I mean, it seems to me that her central concept, the notion that there's some ideology that keeps this all from us morally, is very, very similar to Adam's absent referent business. Very, very similar. Striking. I mean, when I heard her when I heard her speaking, I had to go back and listen to it again, because I thought, this is, it doesn't sound like Carol Adams, and yet this is Carol Adams' position. But I also think, as I said, I disagreed with Carol when she said this in the 1980s, the business that, the reason why we did this was because we weren't aware of what we were doing. And the answer is, that's nonsense. And so far as I'm concerned, that's nonsense. We know what we're doing. We've come up with multi-level justifications. And yes, it's true. It's not enough.
Yeah, that's right. But the point is, I take it, when you say we, we're talking about society.
I'm talking about I'm talking about all of us who participated. I remember. I mean, it's been 28 years I've been a vegan, and I guess 31 or 32 since I've been since I stopped eating flesh. But I mean, my memory's fading as each day goes, and Elizabeth, this will happen to you one day. But my memory is getting darker. But I can tell you that I do remember I remember when I was younger and I ate animal products, and I remember having a discussion with somebody in college who was one of the few vegetarians I knew. I didn't know any vegans because, as I said, I didn't until 1983. I didn't know that vegans existed, but I did know one or two vegetarians in college, and I remember having discussions with one of these people, and her name was Andrea. Actually, I remember, and I remember having discussions with her and thinking, well, but look, they're animals are animals. I mean, they're different from us. They don't they don't have the same they don't think the same way that we think. They don't really care that we're eating them. And I mean, I used to believe all of this stuff, and it wasn't because they weren't in my I mean, I had interacted with dogs. I guess I knew on some level that dogs were more complex beings. then
you've explained that yourself with the concept of moral schizophrenia, Gary. But the point I think that she was making, and I do echo the fact that it sounds like Carol Adams' work mixed in with a bit of general sociology. Yeah, I understand that, but maybe she's really just saying that we're aware of what we do on some level, and then if you look at the work on denial, which again I did, then often what we do is we take steps to not know what we already know. There's a kind of complex psychological process that we can go through. And this doesn't involve children now because they are generally unaware. They have to go through a two-tier system of bringing them into the world in which at first non-humans are friends and companions, and then the next thing is you've got to tell them, well, some are, but other ones we eat and this kind of stuff. But then when we're adults, even though we can know something, we can definitely take active steps to not know it. So maybe she was looking at that notion that we know it physically, but we can then not know it morally. And we can do it by the way that you just said. We can call them animals. We're humans. They're animals. They're lesser than. And we can then start to put all these barriers in between our moral concern and them, and we can other them.
I don't know. I don't see it as that. I mean, it seems to me it's pretty clear that what we're doing is we're making a moral decision that they're inferiors and we're superiors, and that we have the right to do what we're doing. And I think the moral schizophrenia is a direct result. I mean, as I said in Introduction to Animal Rights, I mean, I had it sort of laid out as the problem. The disease is moral schizophrenia, and the cause of it is animals are property, basically, and the cure is applying the principle of equal consideration. And so I think that we've got fairly elaborate this is fairly out in the open, and it's been fairly out in the open for a while now, and we've been discussing it philosophically for centuries, and certainly intensely.
I think now, Gary, what you're doing there now, you're talking like an academic. In other words, you have thought about it for a long time.
Yeah, I can add my 2 cents as a new vegan and all that, if you like here, because when I thought of absent referent or whatever, I thought it meant that you didn't stick up for them. So for me, absent referent is you know what you're eating and everything. I obviously misinterpreted it.
No. What Carol Adams meant with absent referent was the notion that when you ate an animal, you didn't realize you were eating an animal because of the way we had constructed the institution of consuming animals. We basically denied. We had a number of devices that we used to deny the moral personhood of animals. It's very similar, I mean, in a sense, to pornography does the same sort of thing. You don't really sort of focus on that there's a person there. You're just focused on whatever body part you fetishize, and so and that's one of the insidious things about pornography is that as an institution, it's got a number of subtle and insidious devices which keep you from recognizing. Everybody, most men are horrified at the idea that their mothers or sisters or lovers or whatever would be involved in pornography. Yet when they're consuming pornography, they're consuming something involving someone else's mother or sister or lover or whatever, and yet they don't. There's a bunch of insidious and subtle devices which basically keep us from that. We're aware of it on one level, but I guess it goes to what Roger was saying before. It's sort of the moral impact doesn't hit us, but
one device, of course, is animal welfareism.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that acts as a very strong buffer. But carry on, Elizabeth. What were you saying?
Well, I was just going to say that, very recently I was consuming animal products. I've only been vegan for 2 years, and I remember very clearly what it was like. And I think I discussed it recently. When I was eating animals, I knew, and it sounds sadistic for me to say this, and in reality it is, I knew that they were thinking, feeling beings because I had seen them, and I'd been close to them before. Even sheep and cows I had seen, and I had shared my house since I was born, as long as I can remember, with cats. So the thing that I didn't acknowledge was that I had a moral obligation to them, or that I had no right to use them because I was indoctrinated with the right to use them. So it isn't a complete ignorance of what you're doing. It is a superiority thing. I was told whenever I raised my voice in protest, and I tried a couple of times, and this is not to make judgment on my family, they were also indoctrinated. I was immediately told that was a ridiculous way to think. These animals are food, and that's what they are. And I knew that I was eating living, sentient animals. I just didn't. I just thought I had a right to do it. I knew that I didn't. It was never discussed how brutal their treatment was, and I was never indoctrinated with welfare until right before I went vegan, and I started buying, when I started seeing the videos and things like that, and that's what Peter told me to do, and that's what I did until I woke up. But that's the perspective I can offer, is that, yeah, everybody knows, but they're told that we have a right to do it, and so
where the welfare bit comes in there, Elizabeth, I think we've spoken about this before, where the welfare bit comes in there is the fact that people know there are such organizations as the RSPCA, and that they know that there is organizations which are called Humane Society of something or other. And so therefore, their job, they think, and they know, is to sort out any problems in the system of use. And so that does act as a very kind of strong buffer, in the sense that bringing this back to the animals film, someone could even go and watch the animals film, be horrified at what they see, then go out and go down to the local restaurant, and then be aware, because of animal welfarism, that what they've seen on the screen has got nothing to do with what's just been put in front of them as a meal, because that's not the same. Because there is these things called the humane societies, or the RSPCA would have done something about it. That's what they're there for. And so
I agree. I mean, I agree with you. I think that if there's anything that accounts for why people continue to eat them, it is the welfarist ideology. And I think specifically, it's nothing invisible about it. It's this notion that we've been hearing about for 200 and some odd years now, that basically animals don't care that we eat them. They only care about how we treat them and how we kill them. So there's nothing inherently wrong with what we're doing. So even if I'm uncomfortable at some film I've just seen, or something you've just told me, I'm going to engage in an activity which I don't regard as inherently problematic, because I've been told by people who claim to have a great deal of concern about animals, the leaders of the animal movement, they've told me, I mean, again, this is Bentham's position, it's Singer's position, that killing them per se is not imposing a harm on them. And I think if you take that perspective, I think then, all of this stuff becomes, I feel a little uncomfortable about it, but there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just a question of tidying it up, and we're making progress. And see, I think that's what's really insidious about all this, is that we're telling people eating the animals is per se not a bad thing. You can be, you can even allow yourself, I believe the expression that Singer uses is the luxury of meat. And you can have that meat as long as you take care to make sure that animal's been treated well. And as a result of the wonderful efforts of organizations like HSUS and Martin Baloch and these other welfarist groups, this is exactly the direction in which we're moving. So it's not that there's something inherently wrong with it. It's not like we don't view it the way we viewed slavery. As something where, yes, there were better forms of slavery and worse forms of slavery, but slavery was inherently an objectionable institution. One of the things that welfarism has done is sanitize it as an institutional matter. They've sanitized exploitation as an institutional matter, and I think that's really really problematic. And I think that's what accounts for why people. I mean, certainly. Whatever you want to say about, in the past, we can discuss it, but it seems to me clear now that one of the major reasons why, particularly in the United States, in Britain, in Australia, New Zealand, places where there's a really strong, and has been historically, a strong sort of animal welfare ethic, one of the reasons why people really aren't questioning use is because they've got animal people running around saying, don't worry, we're going to tidy this up. And since you're not doing anything inherently wrong anyway, tidying up is really the right way to go. But look, I appreciate Roger's attempt to defend another sociologist. They all defend. Now there was another thing, and that is Denayer
failed miserably.
No. Look, Melanie Joy should have a deep debt of gratitude to you for trying to wage the good fight. But the other sociological point was the point that Denayer makes about when we question words, that we use, we open the door to change. And again, I'm not denying. I don't want to sort of come off here as sort of anti-sociological, but I'm not denying that
you're doing a good job.
Well, all right. Let me be frank with you. All right, sociology should not be taught in universities. I'm only kidding, and I'm only kidding, Roger. But I do find it odd when Denayer says that, because I agree that language. I think that that language can reinforce all sorts of bad ideas that we have, but it's because we've got the bad ideas in the first place that we're using the language. And so by always referring to meat as flesh, which I do all the time. I do that all the time. It's not going to stop if the fundamental moral reasoning is speciesist. Then the language. It doesn't matter whether you change the language. One of the things I think is interesting is with respect to sexism. There are a lot of things now. There's still a huge amount of sexism in the language, but it's different from the way it was 20 years ago. But I don't really think, in many ways, sexism has. I think sexism in certain ways has become more insidious, and I think sexism is still deeply entrenched in the society. I also think racism is deeply entrenched in the society. There are certain things you don't say now. There are certain words you don't use now. But you don't have to use those words to express racism. What we're seeing right now in the United States, or what we were seeing even with greater frequency in terms of the sorts of responses to the Obama healthcare plan. Anybody who was observing that stuff, who didn't think that it had to do with an expression of racism and taking back our America, what that meant, those were trigger words for taking it back for white men and taking it back for white folk. And so the fact that we don't use certain words anymore doesn't mean that we're any less racist. And so
isn't it the case, Gary, that the right at the moment are promoting a slogan, or going around with T-shirts which have got "Keep the change"?
Yes.
Right. And so that's a kind of it's a kind of.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't think it can hurt, though. I don't see anything wrong with avoiding,
look, I agree with you.
Bringing it out in the language. It can't hurt. I think that.
I agree with you. I'm not doubting it. It can't hurt. I just don't think that it is in any way. Just like I don't think Melanie Joy is offering us a solution by saying that there's this invisible ideology that accounts for all this. I don't think that really, as an empirical matter, explains things, and I don't think as a way that we all morally reason. The way we talk reflects how we think. And I understand that there is, the concepts and the words are inextricably intertwined because we're animals who use this symbolic communication instrument. So I understand that. But it just seems to me that you can change, the language. Changing the language is not going to change the thinking. That I agree, it reinforces it. It's a better idea not to use it. But the bottom line is, if you want to continue to exploit animals, and if you don't think it's morally objectionable to exploit animals, you're going to continue to exploit animals, and I don't really care how your language changes. There are a lot of people in the animal movement who do not use those words anymore, but they are still actively engaged in animal exploitation, and they're actively engaged in calling people who oppose animal exploitation divisive, absolutist, fundamentalist, etc., etc., etc. So, it doesn't even work necessarily with animal people. I mean, I think we've got to realize that what we're dealing with is actually, something that really is like racism.
I think the issue is very complex here, but I think that a kind of linguistic challenge to the dominant paradigm is important, but obviously it can't just be the only thing.
Well, not on its own. I mean, it's not on its own, but I think that
that's right. But it can lead and it can follow at the same time, and so these things are generational. And in some senses, the point that you just made, Gary, which is that many animal advocates still use language which wouldn't necessarily find its way into Dunier's work. It's interesting there because I made a note right at the beginning of this One Planet thing where Mike Mansfield makes a comment, and he's doing that usual thing about a chicken has got the space of an A4 piece of paper. Do you have A4 over there as well as in Europe?
No, but no. But it's a size.
Paper. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just smaller than foolscap, right? And so, but Mike Mansfield said this is the space, and he says that's its space. That's its space. He says that, and so even for somebody like Mansfield, who's very careful with the language, very articulate guy, he still finishes off with calling non-humans its. And what I think is being said there in terms of the linguistic challenge is that it reflects how deeply embedded these ideas are within our culture. And so if you then adopt a challenging language, it brings people up short, and therefore it can create a conversation, it can create a awakening. And you can do that. In actual fact, funny enough, going back to the animal itself, one of the things that Schonfeld did was just go around with Mike in the 1980s and said, can you tell me about non-human animals? Or what do you think about non-human animals? And people were just looking at him as though he was speaking some kind of Martian dialect, because the phrase non-human animal didn't mean anything to anyone, And so I think language can be a challenge to the dominant paradigm. It's no good just on its own, because, as Gary says, what people will do is carry on exploiting and just go along with the new language. So you've got to have it in tandem. So I don't think it's a question of what follows and what leads. I think it's a question that these things evolve together.
Well, I mean, perhaps. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that, for example, many of us now accept that humans are. I mean, it's rather hard to deny, but nevertheless, many people now explicitly will acknowledge that humans are animals. That there are human animals and non-human animals. So the sorts of issues that Victor was...
people still deny that. I, as you know, I go on lots of forums, and people still deny that. And they'll question me and say, what do you mean non-human animals? You mean animals? Stop calling me an animal. Because
really? Do they really do that?
Oh yeah, all the time, and they just don't like it. They feel insulted by it because, of course, sociologically, again, if you look at the research, the main time we use animal is when we insult somebody, especially women. Funny enough.
Well, that's really interesting, because I don't encounter that. I mean, occasionally I do. Occasionally I will. Mostly from people who are politically conservative and who will usually, most of the time when I hear that, it's in the context of somebody saying to me, well, humans are different because they have souls, and so therefore we're not like animals, because what separates animals from humans is that humans have souls and animals don't. So I'm generally getting this from people who are religious.
We don't tend, that's right, but we don't tend to get that religious argument so early. I think in North American discourse, I think you get this religious argument very quick and very early on. whereas I think it comes a little later when we're discussing things elsewhere.
I mean, most of the time most of the time people don't object when I say human and non-human animal. What they say is, well, yeah, we're animals, but we're different because we have self-awareness, or we have this, or we have that. We have bigger, we have bigger brains, or we have this or that. And that we're able to do things that they can't do. We can do calculus and whatnot, and they can't. And so that's the sort of thing that I generally get, is that yeah, we're animals, but we're different. And so, but the thing is that clearly things have evolved considerably from the time when Victor Schonfeld was making the Animals film. And in terms of language, and the fact that there are far more people now willing to acknowledge that, the reality that we're all animals, and some of us are human and some of us are non-human, but we're all animals. And nevertheless, that hasn't really sort of resulted in some sort of camaraderie and recognition, And so that's the thing. I mean, again, I understand that they're generational. I understand they reinforce each other. All I'm saying is that, is that I think, again,
isn't it interesting though, Gary? I mean, I think the part of the problem is something that you touched on when you gave that talk in Dublin, when we were talking about the idea that there's still a lot of ignorance about the notion that cows have to be constantly made pregnant to produce the amount of milk that is extracted from them. And that, I think, comes back to the fact that not only do we resist quite often the label animal, we never think of ourselves as mammals. We never think of ourselves as mammals. We don't self-describe as a mammal. We don't self-describe as an ape. And so the interesting thing then is that when you then talk about cow mammary glands, it doesn't seem to make any connection at all to
even with women.
Yeah, that's right. To their own pregnancy, they don't make a connection. They don't think, oh well, yeah, that's probably right because I'm a mammal too. And,
yeah, but Roger, let me ask you this though: how many? I mean, I know lots and lots. I mean, we've both been teaching for a long time. We've both been involved in universities for a long time. I know tons of people who self-describe as feminists. I know lots of them self-describe as radical feminists, and yet, and they would, they're very careful about the language they use, but they do not see at all these issues. And you can talk about them until you're blue in the face, and you're not gonna, to make a lot of progress with some of these folks. You really got to sort of get to them conceptually, and it's not just a question of language. But in any event, look,
that's what I said. If it's language only, then that's not enough. But language does it's an important thing. Again, often in sociology we would say that language is one of the ways that we reflect and articulate power relations. And you can even see that. I mean, I did the sociology of humor, and you can see how language is used within the power relations on a gender basis, or a class basis, or on a race basis, even through jokes. And so language is very important. It is the way that we do talk to each other. And the interesting thing there is that I don't think it has to be so overt. I think a lot of what we've talked about this evening is kind of out of focus. It's like speciesism is something there that's kind of hanging around over us as some overarching ideology, but it's kind of out of focus. We don't really question it that much. Nobody ever calls it into question too much. There's an element of safety in numbers that I feel to it.
I think you've just hit something very, very important, and that is, I think one of the main reasons why people continue to do what they're doing is they listen to the arguments, and to the extent that there are a few of us out there who are making arguments rather than appealing to other sorts of things, but we're making arguments about animal exploitation. I think a lot of people say, yeah, that's really interesting, but since everybody's still doing it, these arguments must be wrong in some way I can't figure out. There's some sophistry. And I really think, Roger, that's the point you've just made is a really important one, and that is that there is safety in numbers, and we continue to do what we're doing because we figure, well, everybody else is doing it, so it must be right. If it were wrong, the way these folks argue it's wrong, or some of them argue it's wrong, then people wouldn't be doing it. And I think, you also have the problem with a lot of people are in relationships, for example, with people who are not vegan. So therefore, it's rather hard for them to sort of come to the conclusion that the person they're living with is doing something morally wrong. So this is one of the reasons why I think, the flexible veganism business appeals to a lot of people, because, it allows you to sort of continue a relationship without making a normative judgment about the conduct of somebody that you're living with. So I think that, there are lots of complications there. All I'm saying is that, you and I have been involved in the animal movement for 30 years now, basically, and a lot of our friends and the people that we know don't use that speciesist language anymore, but yet a lot of them aren't vegan, and a lot of them are continuing to exploit animals. And so you would think that, if language really played, I think it's something else. But in any event, who knows? But look, I think that's a good point. We've been going on a while, and I think it's a good point. Elizabeth, Roger, do you have any final points you want to make?
Well, all I want to say is that I really, really hope that we do start to see more articles and programs and things that are about use. It touches a nerve. People have never heard it before, and it's incredibly effective. So I think that with the Schonfeld documentary, I'm very interested to hear about the vivisection, because I do think that he is going to express an objection to the use of animals in vivisection completely, which a lot of people do. I just wish that it was with all animal use, but I do think that this was I suppose I should be positive about the fact that he did it. There was some objection to welfare reform, but I'm looking forward to the next decade where we're going to have programs and we're going to have articles and mainstream articles about use, and then that will change the paradigm in which the language we use will be much more relevant. Because, Gary's right. I mean, people think that animals are ours to use, and they think they're things. It doesn't matter what we say. So that's what I hope that happens, and I think that we're starting to do that. So I was very disappointed, to be honest, in the BBC one, because I guess I had higher hopes. But I'm realistic enough to realize that it was still better than, I guess, things that happened 10 years ago. I just don't know what happened 10 years ago. So to me, I'm impatient, but I have to realize it's going to take some time, and we're doing it.
And we're looking forward to, I guess, the next program, because it's kind of half time. If we thinking of this, we're half time in this process. Just one final point from me is that I think Schonfeld said something very interesting right at the end when he started to introduce the fact that they were going to turn to vivisection for the next program. He said we're going to be something like walking again with eyes open.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He did.
That's right. Yeah, well, that's an interesting and a very sociological thing to say, in the sense that Bauman talks about the fact that society can create moral sleeping pills. We can do that. The societal ambience can turn people off, can turn people away, can create us and them situations, can create boundaries, and we're quite good at that. And a lot of sociologists said that we kind of need to do that. We need to fit things into little compartments in order to kind of deal with them. And so people tend to focus down on either themselves in a very selfish way, or just their family or wider circles. Very, very few people are involved on a national level. Very few people think globally. You go to your community and say, what's been of concern to you today? I don't think many people are going to talk about starvation in the developing world or things like that. It's going to be,
right.
Am I going to get back in time to make the tea? Or, that there's an interesting thing going on with the soap opera, this kind of thing. And so I think society does have a way of feeding us these moral sleeping pills. And so I was struck by that idea that it'd be quite nice for more of us to walk with our eyes open.
I think it's been an interesting discussion. I want to thank you both very, very much, and again, I want to echo I think Victor did a good job, given that his primary focus was on seeing whether or not treatment had changed, and I think from that perspective, I think he did a good job. And I, like you, Elizabeth, so I agree with Roger in that respect, and I also agree with you, Elizabeth, that I look forward to the future where it's only been the past few years that there's really been a discussion about changing the paradigm from treatment to use. That's not a discussion that has happened until fairly recently, and so I think that it will be, and it's obviously an idea which appeals to a lot of people. One of the things that I find very, very interesting is the number of emails I get from people who were omnivores when they encountered the abolitionist approach. And it's not that they were vegetarians and they went vegan, although I get lots of emails from them. But I get emails from a good number of people who were carnivores when they first encountered the abolitionist approach. So I think that these ideas that hey, come on, we all agree that if we're going to impose suffering or death on somebody, we've got the burden on justifying that falls on us, and we can't do it. So therefore, we can't justify that use. But in any event, thank you both very much. Thank you all for listening. If you aren't vegan, go vegan. It's incredibly easy. It's better for your health, for that of the planet, and most importantly, it's the morally right thing to do. And we look forward to our next discussion. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.